Chapter 1. The Night of Betrayal. The storm broke over the valley like a beast unchained. Wind howled through the mountain passes, and rain lashed against the windows of the Silverfang stronghold. Inside, Alpha Kale paced the length of the war room, his boots leaving streaks of mud on the stone floor. Outside, his warriors waited for his command, the call to defend their borders. But Kale's mind was elsewhere. He could still smell the faint trace of lavender and fear in the air, the scent of the one he loved most. Riven, the Omega who had sworn eternal loyalty to him, the one who had carried his child beneath his heart, the one Kale would have died for without hesitation. And yet, Riven was gone. The message had come like a dagger in the night. His spies had seen Riven cross the border, wrapped in the cloak of Kale's greatest rival, the Blackmane Alpha. He had taken Kale's battle plans, the ones that could turn the tide of war, and traded them for safety, power, and promises whispered in the dark. Kale gripped the edge of the war table until the wood cracked under his hand. "How could you?" he whispered into the storm. "After everything." Behind him, a small cry broke through the thunder, the soft, fragile sound of his infant son. The nursemaid, frightened by the violence of the weather, had left the cradle by the fire and fled to the lower halls. Kale turned, his anger dissolving at once. He crossed the room and lifted the baby into his arms. The child, Lior, blinked up at him with wide, trusting eyes the color of new dawn. "You're all I have left," Kale murmured. His voice trembled for the first time in years. "I'll never let anyone take you from me." Outside, lightning split the sky, revealing the silhouette of the mountains, the same mountains that led toward the Alpha King's domain, a distant place ruled by power and fear, where no one dared to tread unless summoned. But Kale knew what he had to do. His pack was broken, his heart shattered, and his son needed safety. He would leave everything behind. By dawn, the Silverfang stronghold was silent. The fire had burned low, casting ghostly shadows over the empty halls. Kale stood on the threshold of his ruined home, a cloak draped over his shoulders, Lior nestled against his chest. "Goodbye," he said quietly, not to the walls, but to the memories within them. He rode out into the rain, his stallion's hooves pounding against the muddy ground. Every mile between him and the fortress was a mile away from the betrayal, from Riven's voice, from the life that had been stolen from him. Days blurred into nights. He passed through forests heavy with mist, villages that bowed to him out of habit but did not ask where his pack had gone. He hunted when he had to, slept little, and spoke even less. Only Lior's tiny heartbeat kept him sane. At last, on the seventh night, he saw the golden banners of the High Dominion, the Alpha King's realm. They shimmered under the moonlight, bearing the mark of a wolf crowned in fire. No one approached that kingdom without reason. Yet Kale carried a letter sealed with his own crest, requesting an audience at the next Alpha Council. It was his right, though few had the courage to attend. Perhaps, he thought bitterly, courage was all he had left. He was shown to a guest hall, large, cold, and silent. Guards watched his every move, as if sensing the turmoil beneath his calm expression. When the door finally closed behind him, Kale sat beside the hearth, his son resting in his arms. Lior stirred, letting out a soft sigh, his tiny hand curling around Kale's finger. The warmth of that touch pierced through every wall Kale had built. "You'll grow up free," Kale whispered. "No lies, no betrayal. I swear it." Outside, the bells of the capital tolled midnight, deep and resonant. Somewhere beyond those walls, the Alpha King, Darius Valen, ruled with an iron will. His name was enough to silence armies. His aura was said to crush even the proudest alphas beneath its weight. Kale closed his eyes, unaware that soon their paths would cross, that his son's innocent voice would call out to the most feared ruler alive, and awaken something in the king that even he had long thought dead. For now there was only silence, the sound of rain against the windows, and the heartbeat of a promise. The morning broke pale and cold over the capital, sunlight creeping across marble floors like hesitant fingers. From the palace balcony, Kale could see the entire city, silver roofs, tall spires, the faint mist curling above the training grounds. It was a kingdom of power, of precision. Nothing here was left to chance, and soon he would stand before its king. Kale adjusted the collar of his formal uniform, one hand steadying the bundle in his arms. Lior had woken early, full of quiet curiosity, his small eyes drinking in the unfamiliar world around them. The child gurgled softly, tugging at the edge of Kale's cloak. You must stay quiet today, little one, Kale whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his son's forehead. There are alphas here who eat silence for breakfast. He forced a smile, but his heart thudded with nerves. He had faced warlords, wild packs, and death itself. Yet the thought of standing before the Alpha King sent a chill through him deeper than any battlefield. The council hall was vast and echoing, built from black stone and gold veins that shimmered faintly under the torchlight. Rows of thrones lined the circular chamber, each seat marked by a crest, the sigils of the ruling packs. The air buzzed with dominance, with scents sharp and varied, cedar, pine, frost, smoke. Alphas from across the realm had gathered, their gazes cutting toward Kale as he entered. He felt it at once, the subtle prickle of challenge, of judgment. An alpha without a pack was a wolf without teeth. Yet Kale met every stare with quiet defiance. Then the doors opened. The sound that followed was not footsteps, but authority itself. The air seemed to bow. The Alpha King entered. Darius Valen was taller than Kale expected, his frame broad and commanding, wrapped in black and gold armor that glimmered under the torchlight. His eyes, molten gold, cold and burning at once, swept across the room. Every Alpha present lowered their head, their instincts bending to the sheer weight of his presence. Kale bowed stiffly. He had never believed the stories, until now. The man's aura pressed against his senses like a tide, suffocating and magnetic. Begin, Darius said, his voice low, resonant, the kind of voice that silenced storms. The council began with matters of territory and alliances. Kale listened, silent, rocking Lior gently in his arms whenever the child stirred. For a while, no one noticed, until a small, sleepy voice cut through the chamber. Papa? The word echoed like a bell dropped into still water. Kale froze. Every head turned. The room fell utterly silent. Lior blinked, while confused by the sudden stillness, his little hand reaching toward the dais, toward the throne where the Alpha King sat. Darius's golden eyes lifted from the reports before him and found Kale's face. For a long, breathless moment, they simply stared at each other, a fallen Alpha and a king of legends, locked in a gaze that neither could break. Darius's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. Something dangerous. Kale rose at once, bowing low. Forgive me, Your Majesty. My son, he's young. He didn't. Darius raised a hand. The gesture was small, but the hall obeyed instantly. What is your name? The king asked, his voice quieter now, though no less commanding. Kale Varen, formerly of the Silverfang clan, he said, keeping his head bowed. Your Majesty, I. And the child? Kale hesitated. My son, Lior. A faint hum rumbled in the king's throat, as though testing the name on his tongue. He has good eyes. Kale dared to glance up, and found Darius watching not the child, but him. It was not a king's gaze then, but a hunter's. Measuring. Intrigued. Something electric moved through Kale's chest, sharp and unexpected. He looked away quickly. Darius leaned back in his throne. See that a private chamber is prepared for Lord Kale, he said to his steward. We'll speak after the council adjourns. The other alphas murmured, confused, a few even envious. No one earned private audience with the king without reason. Kale bowed once more, his heart hammering in his chest. As he carried Lior out of the chamber, he felt the weight of Darius's gaze follow him. Steady, unrelenting. It burned against his back long after the corridors of the high palace were made of marble and shadow. Kale's footsteps echoed softly as he followed the steward through the maze of halls, the flickering torchlight glinting off his silver armor. Lior slept in his arms now, warm and safe, unaware that his small voice had drawn the attention of the most powerful man in the realm. Kale's thoughts raced. He had come here only to secure recognition as a lone alpha, to rebuild a future for his child. Now the Alpha King himself wanted a private audience, something that no one could predict, much less refuse. The steward stopped before a pair of gilded doors. His Majesty will see you when the sun sets, the man said stiffly. Rest until then. Kale inclined his head in thanks. The guest chamber they had given him was far finer than he expected. All black stone and velvet drapes, a fire already burning in the hearth. But its comfort did little to quiet his nerves. He laid Lior down on a soft bed and brushed a thumb across his son's cheek. What have you done, little one? He murmured, half smiling. You've caught the eye of a king. Evening fell in streaks of crimson and gold. When the summons came, Kale straightened his uniform, tied back his hair, and carried Lior close. He entered the throne chamber once more, but this time it was empty save for the king himself. Darius Valen stood by the tall windows overlooking the city. The light of dusk framed him in molten hues, outlining the lines of his armor and the cold grace of his stance. He turned as Kale entered. "Lord Kale," Darius said, his voice even. "Come closer." Kale obeyed. His every instinct told him to bow, to keep his head low, but when Darius faced him fully, he found it impossible not to meet his gaze. Those golden eyes held something unreadable. Power, yes, but not cruelty. A quiet storm. "I owe you an apology," Darius said suddenly. Kale blinked. "Your Majesty? For the council's reaction earlier, you were mocked for circumstances beyond your control." The king's tone softened by a fraction. "You handled it well." Kale hesitated, uncertain how to answer. "I only wish to serve the realm, sire. My past no longer matters." On the contrary, Darius stepped closer. "A fallen alpha who still holds his head high, that is precisely the kind of strength I value." Kale's pulse quickened. The king was closer now than any man had ever dared to stand. His scent, smoke and cedar, rolled over Kale's senses like a tide. It wasn't overpowering, but steady, grounding. Darius glanced at the sleeping child in Kale's arms. "Your son is brave," he said quietly. "Few could look upon a room full of alphas and speak without fear." Kale allowed himself a brief smile. "He doesn't yet know what fear is. I pray he never will." "You protect him well," Darius replied, "as a father should." The words lingered in the air between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Kale could feel the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat, could sense the weight of the king's attention, not sharp or judgmental, but curious, searching. Finally, Darius turned back to the window. "There is a meeting in 3 days' time with the border packs," he said. "I want you there, by my side." Kale frowned. "Sire, It isn't a request," Darius said, glancing over his shoulder. "Consider it an opportunity. You understand the outer territories better than any man alive, and perhaps," he added after a pause, "I'd like to learn more about the alpha who can command a child's trust so easily." Kale lowered his head, concealing the flicker of confusion and something dangerously close to warmth in his chest. "As you command, your majesty." Darius stepped closer once more. His hand brushed Lior's hair in a rare gesture of gentleness. The faintest smile ghosted across his lips. "You may rest now. Guards will escort you to your quarters." Kale bowed, clutching Lior to his chest as he turned to leave. But before he reached the door, the king's voice stopped him again. "Kale," Darius said quietly. Kale froze. It was the first time the king had spoken his name. "When you stand before me next," Darius said, "do not bow unless you truly wish to." Kale's breath caught. He turned, but the king was already facing the window again, a shadow against the dying light. He left the chamber with his heart pounding, unsure whether he'd just been dismissed or chosen. The palace never slept. Even at midnight, its corridors glowed with candlelight, and the distant echo of boots reminded Kale that the king's dominions stretched into every corner of the realm. Yet, since that evening, something had shifted, a quiet current that flowed wherever Darius Valen walked. The king had begun to summon him often. At first, it was for matters of strategy, border patrols, pact treaties, troop deployments. Kale spoke little, preferring to listen, but each time he offered an opinion, Darius listened, truly listened. The other advisors learned quickly that when Kale spoke, the king's gaze sharpened and the room obeyed. But there were other summons, too, quieter ones. Conversations in the royal garden at dusk, tea shared in the library's silence, walks through the training grounds where Lior toddled beside them, earning rare, amused glances from the usually stone-faced king. Each encounter drew them closer, though neither dared to name what lingered between them. One evening, the king's summons came later than usual. Kale entered the private study, Lior asleep in his arms, to find Darius standing before the fireplace. His armor removed, dressed only in a simple black tunic. It was the first time Kale had seen him without the trappings of power. "Forgive the hour," Darius said, turning to face him. "I couldn't sleep." Kale set Lior down on a nearby couch, careful not to wake him. "Is something troubling you, your majesty?" Darius studied the flames. "Do you believe a man can rule without becoming what he fears?" The question caught Kale off guard. "I don't understand." The king's jaw tightened. "I have kept peace by crushing rebellion, loyalty by inspiring fear. But every night I wonder if what I've built will survive once I'm gone, or if it will fall with me." Kale stepped closer, the light casting shadows across both their faces. Fear may keep men silent, he said softly, but it never earns their hearts. You've held the kingdom together because they respect you, not because they cower. Darius turned toward him fully, golden eyes reflecting firelight. And what of you, Kale Varen? Do you cower? Kale met his gaze steadily. No, my king. For a heartbeat, the air between them changed. The tension that had always hummed beneath the surface sharpened, not dangerous, but intimate. Kale could feel the pulse in his throat, the faint tremor of something he didn't yet dare name. Darius's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Good, he murmured. I find I have little use for those who fear me. They stood in silence, the world outside fading into the crackle of the hearth. Then, from the couch, a small sound broke the stillness. Lior shifted in his sleep, murmuring softly, and Darius's gaze flicked toward him. He dreams without fear, the king said quietly. Children often do. Kale smiled faintly. Until the world teaches them otherwise. Then perhaps, Darius replied, we should change the world before that happens. Kale looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just a ruler, but a man who carried the weight of 1,000 lives and still sought to be better. Something inside him, long buried beneath betrayal and grief, stirred. He realized with a start that he wanted to trust again. In the weeks that followed, rumors began to spread through the palace. Servants whispered that the Alpha King had begun to smile, that the frost in his eyes had melted into something human. The council noticed the way his tone softened whenever Kale spoke, the rare amusement that curved his mouth when Lior toddled into meetings. Kale tried to ignore the whispers. He told himself it was duty, nothing more. Yet each time Darius called his name, not Lord Kale, but Kale, something in him faltered, and Darius, for all his restraint, found his own walls beginning to crumble. He caught himself watching Kale too long, noticing the way his voice lowered when he spoke to his child, the quiet strength in his movements. It unsettled him, a feeling he could neither command nor control. One night, when Kale left the council chamber, Darius remained behind, his hand gripping the arm of his throne. The room was empty, but his words lingered in the air. Why him? He whispered to the silence. No answer came, only the sound of distant thunder rolling over the... Kale stood on the palace balcony, watching the storm roll across the valley below. Lior played nearby, chasing the ripples in a shallow puddle that had formed between the tiles, his laughter echoing softly through the courtyard. Moments like this had become rare treasures, quiet, unguarded. Behind him, the doors opened. Kale didn't have to turn to know who it was. The air itself shifted, thickened slightly with the gravity of presence that only one man carried. Still awake? Darius asked, his tone low but not unkind. Kale inclined his head. I find it hard to sleep when the air feels like this. Storms unsettle me. Darius stepped beside him, arms crossed, gaze sweeping the dark horizon. Storms cleanse, he said after a moment. They tear down what's weak and leave the world sharper, stronger. Kale's lips curved faintly, spoken like a king who's never had his roof leak. Darius turned to him, surprised, and then, for the briefest second, he laughed. It was soft, unguarded, the kind of sound Kale wasn't sure anyone else had ever heard from him. I'll have to visit the villages more often, Darius said. Perhaps you'll teach me what a leaking roof feels like. Kale tilted his head, meeting the king's eyes. And perhaps you'll learn that strength isn't only built by storms. Their gazes held, the air between them humming with something unspoken. Kale felt that familiar pull again, the one that had begun the day his son had uttered a single innocent word in the council hall. But before either could speak again, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the quiet. A royal guard bowed low at the threshold. Your Majesty, a messenger has arrived from the eastern border. Urgent. Darius's composure shifted instantly, from man to monarch. Bring him. The guard nodded and withdrew. Moments later, a courier, soaked from the rain, stumbled forward and knelt, breathless. Your Majesty, raiders bearing the Black Mane sigil. They've crossed into the neutral valley. Silverfang lands among them. Kale froze. Silverfang? The messenger nodded. They carry a banner marked with your crest, Lord Kale. It's a challenge. Darius's golden eyes darkened. Blackmane, that's the pack your Omega fled to, isn't it? Kale's throat tightened. Yes, Riven must be trying to draw me out. For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, the weight of the past pressing down like a storm about to break. Darius's voice, when it came, was iron wrapped in silk. You're not going anywhere near that valley. I'll handle it. Kale bristled. With respect, Majesty, those are my former pack lands. My people are caught in the middle. I said I'll handle it. Darius's tone cracked like thunder. Then, softer. I won't risk you. Kale blinked, stunned by the words. You won't risk me? Darius's jaw flexed. He looked away toward the rain-swept horizon. You've become necessary, he said finally. To the council, to this court, and perhaps, his voice faltered for the briefest instant, to me. The words hit Kale harder than he expected. He looked down, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. Before he could speak, Lior's laughter drifted across the courtyard, bright and innocent. The sound softened something in Darius's face. He turned toward the child, then back to Kale. I'll send my best scouts, Darius said, calmer now. You'll remain here until we know more. Kale exhaled slowly. As you command. When the messenger was dismissed and the guard withdrew, silence settled once more. Only the storm remained, rolling closer, rumbling over the rooftops. You don't have to protect me, Your Majesty, Keel said quietly, after a long pause. I'm not fragile. Darius stepped closer, so near that Kale could feel the faint warmth of him, could see the reflection of lightning in his eyes. I know, Darius murmured. That's what makes it difficult. Their gazes locked again. One holding strength, the other something dangerously close to longing. A flash of lightning cut across the sky. The world seemed to still between heartbeats, the rain whispering against the stone. Then Darius stepped back, breaking the moment. Get some rest, Kale. The storm will pass. Kale bowed slightly, though his chest still ached with words he didn't say. The storm that had threatened for days finally broke. Rain swept across the palace in silver sheets, drumming against the battlements and hissing through the gardens below. Kale had put Lior to bed hours earlier, but he himself couldn't rest. Every gust of wind carried the echo of war. Rumors of Blackmane's scouts in the east, of Riven's name whispered again among the border packs. He was still at the window when the door opened. Can't sleep? Darius's voice was quiet, stripped of its usual weight. He wore no crown tonight, only a dark cloak thrown over his shoulders, his hair damp with rain. Kale turned. You should be resting. Tomorrow's council can wait, Darius finished. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. You've been pacing since sundown. Even the guards are starting to worry. Kale gave a faint, self-deprecating smile. They shouldn't. I'm only thinking. About the past? Darius asked. Kale didn't answer, and that was answer enough. The king moved closer until they stood by the same window, the candlelight catching the tired planes of both their faces. Beyond the glass, lightning revealed the city towers for an instant, black, gleaming like blades in the rain. I keep wondering, Kale said at last, if Riven's betrayal was punishment, for trusting too easily, for believing that loyalty meant love. Darius's brow furrowed. You were betrayed, not punished. I led men who believed in me, Kale murmured. I failed them, and now their sons fight under another banner. Darius shook his head. You rebuilt your honor from ashes. That isn't failure, it's endurance. Kale gave a hollow laugh. You make it sound noble. I know what endurance costs. Darius's voice softened. Every day I wear a crown forged from it. Silence filled the space between them. Kale turned to study the king, the strong line of his jaw, the faint scars that told a lifetime of battles. In the shifting light, Darius looked almost human, almost reachable. Do you ever tire of it? Kale asked. Being the man everyone fears? Darius's eyes lifted to meet his. Every day. Fear is a poor companion. Their gazes held. The air thickened, not with dominance, but with understanding. Two alphas, one once broken, one still bound by his own walls, found themselves standing too close, the distance between them vanishing like mist. Darius's hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against Kale's sleeve. A small, grounding touch. Kale didn't pull away. Why me? Kale asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. You could have any ally you wanted. The king's answer came after a long breath, brushed by it. Because when you look at me, you don't see the crown. You see the man beneath it. Kale's chest tightened, words tangled in his throat. That's dangerous. I know, Darius said quietly, and I no longer care. Thunder rolled, shaking the windows. Kale felt the world narrow to the space between them. The warmth of Darius's hand still resting near his arm, the quiet rhythm of his breathing, the pulse of something he hadn't felt in years. Trust. He could have stepped back. He didn't. Instead, he said softly, "You shouldn't risk your heart on a man already broken." "Then let me be the one to mend what he left behind," Darius replied. It wasn't a command, nor a promise, but something rawer, an offering. And in that moment, Kale believed him. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was steady, sure. Rain fell harder outside, masking the faint sound of Leor stirring in the next room. Kale moved toward the cradle, tucking the blanket around his son, Kiz, then turned back. The king was still there, waiting, not demanding, only present. "Thank you," Kale said simply. Darius inclined his head. "For what?" "For reminding me that not every alpha rules through fear." The king's expression softened, the faintest hint of warmth in his eyes. "Sleep now, Kale. Tomorrow will come soon enough." He started for the door, then paused. Without turning, he added, "And if the storm keeps you awake again, you know where to find me." The door closed quietly behind him. The palace began to hum with unease. Messengers came and went under cover of night, their cloaks dripping rain and secrecy. The Blackmane Pack's movements in the east had grown bolder. Some whispered that the border skirmishes were only a distraction, that something darker was coming. Kale felt it too, in the air, in his bones, in the faint pull of instincts he had learned never to ignore. But what worried him most wasn't the threat outside the palace, it was what was happening within him. He had been feeling strange for days, tired, faintly feverish, and dizzy in the mornings. The palace healers had offered tonics, but he'd waved them away. Only when he caught himself resting a hand against his abdomen one evening, without thinking, did a quiet fear settle into his heart. It couldn't be. Alphas didn't conceive easily. It was rare, almost unheard of. But he knew enough of his own nature and of the bond that had been slowly forming between him and the Alpha King to recognize what his body was trying to tell him. He pressed a trembling hand to the wall and closed his eyes. If he was right, the child he carried was Darius's. Later that same evening, he stood in the training yard watching Darius spar with his generals. The king moved with effortless precision, his strikes swift, his defense unbreakable. He was all power and restraint, the embodiment of what it meant to rule through strength. But when their eyes met across the courtyard, Kale saw something no one else did, the faint flicker of gentleness that surfaced only when the world wasn't watching. After the sparring ended, Darius approached him, sweat glistening along his collar. "You've been avoiding the council," he said quietly, not accusing, just observant. "I've been tired," Kale admitted, though the word felt insufficient. Darius's gaze sharpened. "Tired? You look pale. Has the healer seen you?" "I'm fine, Your Majesty," Kale said too quickly. Darius took a step closer. "Kale," he said softly, and something in his tone made the air between them still. "You forget. I know when you're lying." Kale's throat tightened. He looked away. "It's nothing, I promise." Darius's hand brushed his arm, lingering just long enough to steady him. "Then at least rest," he murmured. "For my sake, if not your own." For a moment, Keel wanted to tell him everything, about the dizziness, the suspicion blooming like both hope and fear in his chest. But before he could speak, a soldier rushed into the courtyard, breaking the fragile moment. "Your Majesty!" the guard called, breathless. "A messenger from the Eastern Watch. The Blackmane Pack has crossed the river. They carry a hostage bearing the Silver Fang crest." Kale's blood ran cold. "Riven," he said under his breath. "He's taunting us." Darius's expression hardened. "Or testing how far I'll go to protect what's mine." He turned to the guard. "Summon my generals. I want the gates sealed and the troops ready by dawn. No one crosses that border without my command." The guard saluted and sprinted away. Kale started to speak, but Darius looked at him sharply. "You'll stay here," he said. "I won't have you near that battlefield." Kale opened his mouth to argue.